Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. And here at Bulletproof Selling, it's our mantra, it's our motto, it's the motivation that gets us out of bed every single day and onto the battlefield of business. And that is that hope is not a sales strategy. Across all the salespeople I get to chat with, across the thousands of them that I've been able to address in the audiences for my keynote talks and workshops, sales and hope, they seem to go hand in hand. And yet, if you tell salespeople, stop relying on hope, they'll look at you like you're crazy because, hey, Sean, we don't rely on hope. I've got my notebook, or I've got my CRM. I've got all the things that I do. I've got my schedule each week. And these are for the salespeople that really have it more locked in than the average person. You know what I mean? A lot of salespeople are just kind of floating around out there, hoping that prospects will get back to them, hoping that those emails get returned. Well, the salespeople that are not relying on hope, there's still a lot more hope than you think that's floating into your pipeline, that's floating into your sales process. So that's why we're here at Bulletproof Selling each and every week to help you remove hope from how you sell. What do you replace hope with? Well, you replace it with certainty. See, my work as a Marine Corps war correspondent showed me that the troops that we were with on the battlefield in extremely dangerous situations, see if this rings a bell. If you're in the field of sales, you got one shot at success. You're devoted to stepping into stressful situations as part of your role every single day. You are out there with a group of people. Not everybody has the same level of competence, and your goal is still to achieve a mission in a certain amount of time. That sounds like sales. Well, it also sounds like what troops had to go through in combat. And they had to replace the hope that would otherwise destroy their mission with certainty, with systems. And so here at Bulletproof Selling, we build sales systems with our guests on every single show. And over the course of the last almost 100 episodes, we've been able to do that with best-selling speakers, best-selling authors, Hall of Fame speakers, people that were at the top of their sales careers at the largest companies on the planet, and those that have then left and have helped salespeople ever since to make sure that they were able to include process, performance, and of course, the people, the relationship skills that it takes to be successful in sales. And across all of the guests that we've had, there's one that stands out to me because he was one of our earlier guests on Bulletproof Selling. And when I asked him, what would you like to focus on? He said, Sean, there's one thing that salespeople need more than anything else, and that's the foundational house that they move prospects through. Now, in sales, we call that a pipeline. Well, you think you might have a pipeline, but most people treat their pipelines like a sales funnel, which means maybe 10% or less will convert at the tail end. 90% of those prospects are going to buy from somebody else. Well, our guest today, if you haven't heard his first episode, I encourage you to go look that up on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, because having a pipeline is really the critical thing that allows you to then build systems on top of that to perform well in sales. But I'm bringing him back for a second appearance on Bulletproof Selling because every time that I get together with this guy, whether it's him on my podcast or I've been able to be interviewed by him a few times, I always learn something from him that I can then use in helping me sell better, helping me serve, helping me fulfill the missions of the prospects and customers that I'm out there serving. So you're going to be able to do that today. Without further ado, welcoming back to Bulletproof Selling, Mr. Ian Selbie, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you, Sean. It's always good to talk to you, and thanks for having me back on Bulletproof Selling. You do a great thing for the sales world, and so keep up the great work, my friend.
Well, thank you, sir. And if anybody's unfamiliar with Ian's work, I'm just going to throw the ball right back into his court. He's got a great show, great content that he's releasing every week. So, Ian, for the folks that weren't able to get your first episode down, maybe they've forgotten about it or they never heard it because they've tagged into us in the middle of our series. Tell us a little bit about you. You're kind of unique in the world of sales in that you were the top salesperson for one of the largest companies on the planet, and then you transitioned out and you've been helping salespeople ever since. So talk to us a little bit about that sales journey that you've been on.
Sure, Sean. I had the honor, I was blessed to be part of the wild, wild west of Apple Computer. From 84 to 94, I was with Apple. Still have my picture taken with Steve Jobs, and I have it on my desk. I put it in my books, but it was a real honor. I had the distinct honor of being their top salesperson in the world in 1990, thanks to a great team. You don't go on the field of battle alone. You have to go on the field with a team, and we were quite successful that one year, and that was quite the honor. In 94, I decided to quit renting my resume to the highest bidder. And in fact, go on a journey of what I love. My passion is to help grow people and companies to reach their potential. in the area of sales and sales leadership. So I started to start my business, developed a training program. Shortly after that, I realized that, wait a minute, it's not just about training. Behavioral change only happens with follow-up coaching as well. So
Mm.
it's not the 2-day dip in the holy training water, hoping it dries right. You've got to drive behavior into the people if you're looking for real positive change, sustainable change. So I've been doing that, written a bunch of books, speaking like yourself. And I'm so glad that COVID, for the most part, is over and
Yeah.
we're back to normal sales business face to face. I've been doing lots of travel to New York and Chicago over the last year and have some great active clients there. And yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me, the Coles Notes.
And you and I have discussed kind of your three P's, the foundational elements of what you consider really takes to have success in sales. What are those three P's that you focus on?
Sure, Sean. Thanks for asking. I mean, the pipeline was our first dialogue, and you've got to have one. You yet, first of all, need to know why you need one.
Yeah.
And then you've got to have some standard business rules for graduating deals through your pipeline so that sales isn't hope. Sales has certainty, systems, and measurement for accountability. So, but that's really part of a bigger framework. So the first P is people. The second P is process. And the third P is performance. So, sure, we can adopt who's there and see what we can do. But, if we know what good looks like from a sales professional in any company, why don't we recruit for that? So I do an assessment on sales organizations. That's typically where I begin. And then some decision making happens in terms of, do we have the right team in place? But what I use to measure that and present that to senior management is something called the Sales Talent Scorecard. So I get senior management involved in helping put together the top 10 criteria that are important to decide what good looks like in a sales professional for them. Of course, I add my 30 years of this industry to make sure nothing's forgotten, but I want their buy-in and involvement. And then that becomes the framework. We then take their existing sales team and measure them using the criteria to set a baseline. So a baseline might be 60% fit, right? Which means there's lots of upside. I've done assessments on organizations that are, 40%, which was a complete rip and replace. They weren't salespeople. It was a terrible use of the word in some cases. Typically, it's in the 60 to 70, Sean. A company I'm active with in New York lately, we're up at 82% right now and still looking to climb from that. So it helps set a baseline. It helps you make decisions on, do you have the right team in place today? Where are the weak points? Which can also help decide what is the gap and what kind of training development is needed. So it's used for that as well. And then when you're recruiting, you're hiring, you're adding to your team, you want to make sure that you're always growing your overall average using the scorecard as a measuring stick from a talent standpoint. People are people. Salespeople have personalities. All of us do. But there's some best practices. There's some base criteria that makes for better than not. So using that I found it, and my clients have found it to be very useful.
And this is something that I think salespeople struggle with because the nature of our industry is that we have to put ourselves out there. And so people that don't have healthy egos don't tend to last long. And the good part about a healthy ego is then you can be the one that walks into a room full of strangers and strike up a conversation with someone, develop a lead. Maybe they're a potential buyer. Maybe they know somebody. And great sales happen that way all the time because we have the ability to do that in sales. Now, it's a double-edged sword because often that same ego that is ideally healthy, that's out there doing things in the world, making a positive impact, it prevents us from being able to see the areas that we can improve. And so I know with all the years that you've had in sales, you've come across a lot of salespeople that were probably really, really good at selling, but they had some character traits, some personality issues that were preventing them from being as successful as they could be. And often these are the blind spots. I equate it to like trying to see the back of your own head. You need a lot of mirrors and a lot of effort to make this happen, but it's important because if the back of your head has a big crazy design in it that you don't want to be there, you might want to know about that. So I'm curious where you see salespeople relying in hope, Ian, on their performance, their ability to be out there in the world, their ability to deliver on what they say. Where are they hoping that maybe they'll be able to muscle through a situation where really some introspection to your point about the assessment, taking a look at where am I performing on plan, that might be the better issue. Can we do that by ourselves? Does it have to be with an external team or a consultant like you or I? Where do salespeople rely on hope in really assessing their own performance over the years?
It's I call it hope, and some people, extroverts, perhaps you've kind of putting some parentheses around that, Sean. And you're right. They're in a room. They're usually the life of the party. They're social. It's easy to introduce people. It's just a nice, easy ebb and flow. But I call that accidental success. there was no intention going on. There was no process. There was no system. They're basing their success on their personality, which can't be replicated, can't be scaled. That can't be turned into a team-wide performance where the quarterback doesn't have enough time to throw the ball. He's going to get sacked, and you're not going to get a first down. So we need everyone's role to be an effective team, just like you are on the battlefield, Sean. So I guess even introverts can be fabulous at sales. And I've proven that. I know that to be a fact. But it's less about the personality and more about the process that drives performance. And that process is a team sport. It is a team game.
How do we assess how process-driven we are then? Because some of us are working with a team that has a great CRM. We have established pipeline stages, but we could probably identify some areas where increased process would be helpful. And some of us are out there just making it up as we go along, no fault of our own, just nobody showed us a better way. How do we self-assess for how process-driven we are?
Well, there's two areas I always look at for sales team performance. And there's the two Q's. It's quantity and quality. So on the quantity side, from a sales leadership standpoint, I need to ensure that everyone's got a sales plan. They know what not just their revenue target is, broken down into monthly activities that drive the results. You can't manage results. All we can do is manage the activity that drives the results. So with that in mind, I hold salespeople accountable on the activity. How do they feed their pipeline? How are they constantly adding to it? We track our win-loss ratio from interested to closed. Some ratios are going to be better. The more referrals a sales rep will get, the higher their ratio. That's just a natural thing that happens in sales. Quality is all about the process and how you properly do it. I'd say the biggest of the seven, I've written a white paper called The 7 Deadly Sins in Selling. And one of the biggest sins, Sean, it's still to this day, 17,000 trained later, it's failure to diligently qualify. It's got nothing to do with closing. I mean, a lot of people are like, wow, if you can't close, well, wait a minute. The problem, if you prematurely ask for the order and the deal isn't qualified, you're going to scare that deal away. Let's ask our listeners, ever had a deal run on you because you were perhaps too confident or over the top? That's because it wasn't properly qualified. If something's properly qualified, so to make sure the quality's there, I ask someone with their pipeline, they've got a deal sitting in the qualified section. I ask them 7 questions. And if I only get 6 answers or 5 answers, I move that deal back to discovered. Now they know what they're missing. So it's about a diligent commitment to the process and the business rules within. And if you qualify thoroughly, you're going to win by 3 touchdowns, not a last-second field goal.
And where do you see salespeople then thinking that they'll be able to use their charisma, their rapport building to overcome the fact that I really should be qualifying this deal instead of, hey, you're my buddy now. You're probably going to buy from me, right? Really, when it, 6 months later and a lot of phone calls and meetings, you're like, Sean, I never had the budget for this. You just kept calling me, which that's happened to me. It's probably happened to every salesperson. How do we then begin to overcome the hope in that I'll be able to use my charisma to get you to buy?
Well, a part of that, Sean, and you referenced it earlier, like the ego is either our best friend or our enemy, right? So depending on what side of it. And if you don't have anything else but a personality, so you don't have the right tools. You're sitting there going, I'm going to imagine this beautiful home and I'll draw a picture of it and it's just going to appear. No, you have to build it with all of the trades involved, which is all of the tools in selling to build that perfect dream home you're visualizing. So somebody who's just using hope as a strategy, thinking their personality, their charm will get them there, maybe with someone they already know, that will happen and it will be a favor. Right. Yeah. But that is not a reoccurring science. That is, one art form that happened once and can't be replicated, can't be scaled across the sales team.
Mm.
So their own ego gets in the way of that, look, I'm a great guy. They love me. Of course they're going to buy from me. Well, you might do that once, but when I'm looking at salespeople, I'm looking for consistent performance. Sure, we'll take your buddy as a customer. Thank you. Now go apply some science and find some real ones and do it the real way, not just through your charm. Charm won't hurt you, but just don't think it's all you need, because it surely isn't.
And there are so many industries, Ian, where they actually base their entire sales turnover model on charisma and charm and getting you to introduce your buddies to the service. I'm thinking like insurance, financial services. As soon as you've then, expanded your network to all of your buddies, well, it's not scalable. So you can't sell anymore because you've never learned how to discover whether the people that you're talking to at the networking event or at the family gathering or at the Little League game are actually qualified buyers. So let's dive into the qualification piece, because this is something that once we have a pipeline in place, I feel like it's one of the next most critical elements in making a sale actually be of value to you and the people that you're talking to make sure you're not wasting their time either. So if I'm going to begin to build a system, Ian, on qualification, which I know this is something you've done for plenty of companies, and it looks a little different depending on the industry, but we're going to paint the broad strokes, as I know that you and I know how to do. So when we build systems here, I'm sure you remember, Ian, we use that acronym TRIM because we're trimming hope away from sales strategies.
Beautiful.
So the T in TRIM being the trigger element. If I'm looking at building a qualification system, do I start that before I even identify an ideal client profile, or is this something that I would pull out of my pocket when I have a human being on the other end of the line? Where is the ideal spot to trigger a qualification process?
I love TRIM, Sean, by the way. Trigger for me is putting together, what does your ideal client look like?
Okay.
What's the demographic? What's the psychic? How big are they? What are their needs? Who are they already loyal to? I call that lead measurement, which is a component, an element that lives in the pipeline. So if I said to a sales rep, here's 10 leads, and they've only got time in one day to call one of them, who would they call? And I've been asking that question for decades, and they always, the most common answer, the biggest deal. I'm going to go chase the elephant first.
Wow.
And then I start to think, well, wait a minute. All right, so the biggest deal first. So how competitive will that big deal be? Very. How many decision makers, influencers will likely get involved? More. And typically in a competitive deal, it takes a long time because there's lots of decision makers with perhaps, a sense of urgency that's not shared by all of them, which is another issue. Why would how profitable will that deal become? The margin, typically price gets trimmed as well when you're chasing big deals like that. So, it's not necessarily the best deal. So I like to keep things simple for selling. It's simple for systems. And so I like to consult to my clients ahead of time before we even talk about qualified. Just like with people, what would good look like in a salesperson? What would good look like in a customer?
Love that. To define what that ideal customer profile looks like, which is different than an ideal prospect profile. And that's something that a lot of salespeople get confused about. And I've been there myself, where I think this person always picks up the phone. That's an ideal prospect because they're communicative, but will they make an ideal customer? Do they have the budget? Do they have the need? Will they refer me? The answer may not be yes.
Right.
So
they even have the power to say yes, Sean. That's the other thing. And the people on the customer side of the desk that are most likely to pick up the phone, to answer your email, to go for your lunch, to wear your swag, to go to the ball game, are all people that are typically called influencers.
Yeah.
They don't have the autonomy to say yes. They can only say no. So we as salespeople are really just sharpening the saw with an audience like that. We're not really in the game. The game is to spend more time with decision makers. Are they harder to get through to? Is it harder to get them? Absolutely. Are referrals your best friend? Absolutely. Is there a proven way to do this sustainably? Absolutely. So those are all things that can be addressed. But so I like to have 5 things. What does the ideal customer look like? So never mind ideal prospect, because that gets overwhelmed. That gets completely trumped by the ideal customer. So is it their ability to make a decision? Is it their location? Is it their, the business pain around their needs? Is it, do you have an existing relationship, or could you have a referral relationship with them? What's their sense of urgency? Each of my clients have adopted their own sense of lead measurement with, of course, some counsel from me around what it means in sales. And then the 5 elements get either a 2 point, a 1 point, or a 0 point, making it out for a perfect score of 10. So when I asked the salespeople, here's 10 leads, what one should you chase first? The hand should say the one with the highest lead measurement score, because that's the one I'm most likely going to win. And then with scoring, like if something's 4 or less, I'm probably not going to pursue that. I'm not going to invest any time in that because it's probably going to take too long, or it's something I don't want to win.
Gotcha.
Some of the lead measurement, Sean, can be dynamic. So perhaps one of them is level of contact. That's always one that I suggest. Now let's talk to decision makers, VPs, whoever. Director might be a 1. Anyone else is a 0. Well, if you're able to climb the ladder and get introduced up the ladder, then a 0 could turn into a 2. So a 5 could turn into a 7, right? So the lead measurement can be dynamic during the selling cycle, which can be months, sometimes years, but certainly.
And so you mentioned then a couple of things, just I think all within the trigger element, which is identifying that ideal customer profile. I want to make sure that I definitely hit everything, because some people are listening to this on the treadmill. I really want to drive it home. Needs, location, urgency, the level of contact you have. What were some of the other things that you really advise salespeople look at for that ideal customer profile?
Sure. And I mean, we're talking generically. Each of my clients, they'd rather sell this part of their offering because it's more profitable.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah.
right?
So
it might be margin weighted as well. It might be urgency weighted. That's another one. When I did a bunch of work for Xerox many years ago, they wanted to know, when the person's lease was up for renewal on their photocopier, that became a sense of urgency, right? Yep. So, less than 60 days from buying, that's a 2. Longer than that, that's a 1. If it's, put them on the trickle program and see them next year, that would get a 0, right? Okay. So each client's a bit different, but level of contact, size of deal, relationship loyalty. So examining who the decision makers have a sense of loyalty to. Is it someone on your team? Is it someone that could refer you? Or is it, dealing 10 years loyally with one of my biggest competitors? That's something, because what that does, when I look at my pipeline using lead measurement, that's my priority management system. That's where I should spend my time. I sort my pipeline, not by size of deal to the top or close date to the top, by lead measurement to the top. That's where I should spend my most proactive time.
And that gives you an objective way then to prioritize your time, instead of just looking at 18 or 200 deals and say, well, which one do I feel best about? Now you can actually put a number behind it to say, these are the people that most closely match that ideal customer profile. So if I've gone through all that work in the trigger element, then what are the things that I'm doing in conversation with my prospect to make this a repeatable process? I've done the work ahead of time. I know that you're a 9 or a 10. What are the things that I can only do on the phone or in a meeting that I want to make sure I do in every conversation to really make sure this thing is super qualified?
Well, I think there's 2 things, and this is where a lot of salespeople make a mess. Like they kind of discriminate against themselves. They just pull themselves out of the deal. A lot of salespeople go into a call with what I call commission breath. And I'm just trying to sell you my product. Do you want to buy some? How much? 10 pounds, 20 pounds? What can you afford, right? That's not a proactive call. The objective of the first call, be it on the phone, more so in person, is to build relationship. And by that, how do you build relationship? You need to develop a sense of trust and respect with someone, right? So I always say to the salesperson, especially in the C-suite, especially if you're calling on decision-making levels, what do I do on the first call? Do I bring my product and do a demo? I'm like, no, it is your product. Leave it in the trunk of your car. Your objective for the first call is to build some sense of trust and relationship with that human being. And the second thing that's most important is the ideal topic, the number one topic for that meeting is business pain. You're not a doctor that shows up handing out purple pills. You want to diagnose the patient. You want to understand what their true needs are. Do they need open heart surgery, or is a Band-Aid going to work? How do you know if all you've got is purple pills, right? So you want to go in there and assess their business pain. You could have done some of this prior to the call,
right?
Research, etc. Your referral might give you some information or insight. but you want to, even with what you do know, you want to validate that with them. So senior management love talking about them and their business and how they could get more success. So what's in the way of their success? Typically their business pain. So it's a wonderful place to begin the dialogue is, what's broken and how might I be able to address it? And the how is not limited by my products or services. I have something called the 3 circles, the outer ring. How do I manufacture value without selling something? How can I add value to that customer out of thin air? And the answer is yes, you can. There's a method for it. It's proven. If I know what someone's pain is, I could introduce them to someone else. They've got a big issue. They live in Florida. I want you to talk to my friend Sean. He'll completely help you, right? Or it could be geography. It might be we're in the process of merging with another company. I've got a consultant that's a champion at mergers and acquisitions. Perhaps you could get some insight with a phone call. No meter running, no dollars,
right?
Just helping them with their pain. So, when I find out what their pain is, it says that I know what your pain is. The second ring is me selling something. I can help you with that. The third ring, those other ways to manufacture value, says I care. And the I care is you still get a point of loyalty from that prospect before you've even sold anything. So that's a great objective for a senior management call for a salesperson, is to develop value based on knowledge of their business pain. And how can you, I'd like to leave the meeting with that senior management. If you're lucky, you get 20 minutes with those guys at first.
Yep.
And have the guy scratching his head going, wow, he didn't even sell me anything and he's helped me with something. What would happen if I actually bought something from that fellow? Right? I'd rather leave that impression than all he was trying to do is push product at me, right?
Yeah, and that's more likely to get you that invitation for another meeting with other decision makers to get you deeper into their organization. So great repeatable process that can then be built into a pipeline. So like you said, if I don't have all of those steps done, it probably doesn't belong in a further stage. I need to bounce it back a stage or two and do the work necessary to really qualify it into that vertical of the pipeline. So with the trigger and making it repeatable, Ian, now we're in the I in trim, which is making this thing improvable. So over the years, I'm sure you've seen ways to iterate this to make it better, or to learn about an industry and discover that in IT and tech and software as a service, we really need to focus on these things, whereas in manufacturing, maybe these other things are more important. What am I going to do to assess this to improve it over the next quarter to make sure that it remains relevant, that I am qualifying, and more importantly, to your conversation just now, that I'm adding value? Because value in 2020 probably doesn't look the same as it does today. How am I improving this?
I mean, there's a number of ways, Sean, and it's all about, and I know we violently agree on this. It's all about keeping score of certain things. Sales is a lot like baseball. There's a lot of stats. And if we just turn a blind eye to it, we're missing some gold to make our process better, make ourselves more effective within the process. So I look at a number of things. Lead measurement through time can evolve. What does your ideal customer look like, as you mentioned, in 2020? That might look differently today. Certainly their business pain may have changed. Certainly the competitive landscape may have changed. Loyalties could have gone, someone dies, there's turnover, people have children, that people move, they don't come back to work. There's lots of things that it's a changing landscape. It's like a cork on the water, ever bouncing. So reevaluation of lead measurement is what we think good looks like still good. So that's something I would revisit. The other thing, Sean, is in the pipeline, and this is where it gets personal. As you know, the first stage of the pipeline for me is activities. What are we doing to fill the pipeline? There's lots of things. Account reviews, pipeline Wednesday, trade shows, networking events. There's lots of different things to generate the activity. The first section is called interested. Not that the salesperson's interested, that the prospect is interested.
Yeah.
And their demonstration of that is that they're going to give you some time. If someone's truly not interested, they're not going to take 20, 30 minutes out of their busy schedule to sit down with you. So interested means you booked a meeting. So interested is really the second, but the first face-to-face stage of the pipeline. Then it goes discovered, qualified, where those 7 things live, selected, which means you are the shortlist, closed, you've got the PO, and then the final stage is reference. So they're happy to be a reference. They will give you repeat referrals and references. So that actually builds a loop into your pipeline. that's a gift that will keep on giving. So I look at the interested, Sean, to close ratio. And it will depend on to what level is that sales professional getting referrals, because close ratio on a referral could be 3 or 2 to 1. It's mother's milk to salespeople. It's the sweetest thing that there is, and you have to earn them. By the way, you don't just go and say you haven't bought anything yet. Can I call you a referral? No, that's not gonna fly. You earn them like E.F. Hutton used to say, one at a time.
Amazing. So I want to make sure we have time to dive into the M in trim, which is the measuring piece. You mentioned a couple of things that we can measure, but if I want to really make sure that my qualification process is generating positive results, am I measuring throughput in my pipeline? Am I measuring engagement? And is it higher than it was before because now I'm showing up offering value instead of just asking people to buy stuff? What am I measuring to make sure this process is worth continuing?
For sure, Sean, and this might be partly I and M of trim. And so the one measure I was getting to is interested to close. So a typical interested to close ratio for a salesperson, again, dependent on referral levels, might be 6 or 5 to 1, which means you need 6 meetings to, all the way through the pipeline, through the process, close 1 deal. So if you know you need 10 deals a month, you better have 60 new prospects a month, right? And that's using just round numbers, right? So that's one measurement that has to be constantly looked at, rep by rep, because that's going to tell you who's following the process better than others, right? So that's a measurement you really want to keep an eye on and improve upon. If someone's having a hard time with the prospecting part, which is typically, the quantity part, that's typical for most salespeople. They just want their phone to ring and have leads come into their inbox, and that's selling to them, right? That's called customer service to me. That's not called selling. But it's because there's a reason there's numbers on the phone. It's for dialing. It's not for answering. So that's one thing I look at. The other thing is it's kind of like baseball stats. What does my qualified to close ratio look like? Right? So that's going to tell me how good across the team the salespeople are actually qualifying. Because if there's no coaching or accountability, and I do that through my monthly sales reviews, I have each sales rep talk about their top deals once a month, and we build an action plan for how to win them. And while I'm doing that, I'm asking them 7 questions. And if they've got 5 answers, push that back, but now you know what you're missing. So the qualification metric, that's also with an eye towards improvement. So some salespeople, a great way to improve that with a salesperson is to make a 4-legged sales call with them, right? So the sales manager going on the call. 4-legged doesn't mean hands and knees begging for the order, although I have done that in my career. But it means the sales rep and the sales manager or the consultant, yourself or myself, going on the call with them. So you do a pre-call setup. So what do we know about the deal? We're not sure about this. Make sure you ask that. Let the sales rep run the call because you want the customer buying from them, not you, right? And then at the end of the call, we debrief and what did we learn? So that's a good way to sharpen the saw on being good and consistent at qualifying and making those improvements you're talking about.
And that's a complete system, Ian, end-to-end on qualifying to the ideal customer rather than just who's going to be picking up the phone and having a nice conversation. Because we're in this field to not only gain a great income, but also to make a great impact. And that happens when we are targeting people that need, want, and realize their need for what we have. So amazing job, Ian, as always. And for all of you, again, that have heard this and you're thinking, I'm just getting just knowledge dropped on me right and left, I want to send you to Ian's website. I want to encourage you to get a hold of his books. Ian, how do we do that? How do we get deeper into your world?
Sure. Happy to. As you mentioned, Sean, you and I are like podcast brothers. You have one, you've been on mine. I have my podcast is called Confessions of a Sales Pro. Less sins, more wins. You can find that anywhere. You can find it on my website or Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever. My website is salesmentoru, the letter U.com. And so it's salesmentoru, one word.com. All my books, and I've got audiobooks, printed books, virtual books, and the podcasts all on there too. People can look at things. I've got certain things that are free downloads. So fill your boots. Happy to help. Absolutely.
Awesome,
again,
sir.
Sean, thank you for having me back on Bulletproof Selling. It's always an honor and great to talk to you, my friend.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. For those of you that are watching this live, make sure that you're checking out our YouTube channel, subscribing there, where every single one of these conversations is archived. And of course, if you're listening to us on podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, best thing you can do for us is to leave a review there. Help the world know that we don't have to rely on hope in sales. There is a better way so that we can get out there and not just fulfill our mission, but to help our prospects fulfill theirs. Well, Ian, it's been a pleasure having you back on the show, sir. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. Greatly appreciated.